Greetings, detectives. Mrs. McKay here, and we are working on learning target clue for case 3, clue 6. So let's go ahead and start by writing and filling in the blanks. I can use the constant difference. So write the word constant. I can use the constant difference to identify the arithmetic means, M-E-A-N-S, of an arithmetic sequence. So go ahead and make sure you get that written. And then let's go ahead and take a look at our review section. So we've been working on sequences, and specifically with arithmetic sequences, there's a constant difference. And if you had an arithmetic sequence like 2, 5, 8, 11, the constant difference would be what I do to one term to get to the next term, and it is always the same thing. In this case, I added 3 to 2 to get 5, and then I add 3 again to get 8, and I add 3 again to get 11. So my constant difference is 3. Okay, so that's going to be important as we work through this lesson. And then the other two things that we've spent quite a bit of time on is understanding a recursive equation and an explicit equation. And remember, a recursive equation is always going to be dependent on the previous term. When you write a recursive equation, you say whatever the term before the one I'm trying to figure out is, when I add the constant difference to it, that's how I find my next term. And then an explicit says you don't have to know what the previous term is, as long as you know the first term and you add the constant difference a certain number of times, and it has to be n minus 1 times. So whatever term you're trying to find out, it's going to be that term minus 1, and then you multiply that times the difference and you add it to your first term, and that's sort of your equation for being able to figure out any term. So those are just some things that we've talked about, and we're going to be using those ideas as we move through this lesson. So let's go ahead and take a look at this middle section. It says find the missing terms. So here I have a sequence. I have 1, 2, 3 are my 3 terms. First term, second term, third term. I have 5. I have a blank, and then I have 11. So this is an arithmetic sequence, and my question is, what goes in this missing blank? What is the missing term? See if you can figure it out, and then write it in there. Well, what did you come up with? Did you decide that it was 8? Because 5 plus 3 would be 8, and then 8 plus 3 would be 11, right? That is the missing term. But my question to you is, how did you figure that out? Why don't you take a minute and write how you figured out what that missing term was. The reason I asked you to do that is because I want you to start paying attention to what method or what strategy you're using to figure out the missing term. So you may have decided you might have just kind of guessed and checked. So guessing and checking might have been the way that you did it. You might have said, well, let's see, if I add 2 to 5, then that gives me 7, and if I add 2 to 7, that gives me 9, so that's not enough, so I must have to go a little bit higher. What if I add 3? Or what if I add 4? 5 plus 4 would make 9. 9 plus 4 is 13. Oh, that's too much. So then maybe you kind of went back and forth and narrowed it down to 3. So you may have just used guess and check. Okay? You may have decided to find an average. where you took the 5 and the 11, you added them together to get 16, and then divided it in half to get 8. So you may have done that. You may have used an average. Or you may have tried to figure out another way to kind of get the constant difference, and then once you got the constant difference, you knew you just needed to add it to the 5 or subtract it from the 11. So there's different ways. So you may have come up with a formula, and we'll talk more about that as we go on. So let's go ahead and do the next one. See if now you've got 3 missing terms. You've got your first term is 18 and your last term is negative 10. So see if you can fill in those missing terms. What are those missing terms? So what did you come up with? How did you do this? Did you try guessing and checking? Did you say, well, let's see, if I add 3, well, wait, I better not add because I'm going to get down to negative 10, so I know I'm going to have to be subtracting something. So from here to here, I'm going to have to subtract something. What if I subtracted 4? If I subtract 4, that would give me 14, and if I subtract 4 again, that would give me 11, and if I subtract 4 again, that would give me 7. Subtracting 4 again would give me 3. So I'm going to have to subtract a lot more. So you might try to, what if you subtract 5? Let's see, if I subtract 5, that's going to give me 13. Subtract 5, that gives me 8. Subtract 5, that gives me 3. Still not enough. Maybe I should subtract 10. If I subtract 10, that gives me 8. If I subtract 10, again, that gives me negative 2. Well, that's too much. So you can see that it's going to take me a couple tries to try to figure out what the guess and check is. I could also perhaps do an average. So if I take 18 and negative 10, that gives me 8. And when I divide that in half, that gives me 4. So maybe that's my middle term right there, that my middle term is 4. And then I could take the average of these two. 18 and 4 is 22. Divided by 2 would be 11. And then the same here, 4 and negative 10, when I add those two together, that gives me negative 6. Divided by 2 gives me negative 3. So let's see if that works. Do I have a common difference? 18 to 11 is minus 7. 11 to 4 is minus 7. 4 to negative 3 is minus 7. So you can see that I'm figuring out that my common difference is minus 7. So that works as well if I can do these averages like this. But we may end up having a little bit of a tricky problem as we move forward using averages. I think you can see that guessing and checking is starting to be a little bit more complicated as we get more terms. It's a little bit easier when we only have one middle term that we just have to figure out. That's kind of easy. So I'm going to maybe kind of draw a line through guessing and checking just because it's going to start getting a little tricky, isn't it? Averages, they're still working. And I want to now talk a little bit about how I might have figured this one out. Actually, I think I'll wait. I'll wait till we get to this last one. So go ahead and work on what the missing terms are. Now we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 missing terms that you're going to figure out to get from 12 to negative 6. Try that out. So what did you do? Did you go ahead and do the averaging again, or did you come up with another way to do this? If we did the averaging, we'd take the 12 and the negative 6, we'd add the two together, and then we would, that would give us a positive 6. We would divide by 2, that would give us 3. So 3 would be our middle term, and then we'd have to somehow, let's see if we put the 3 there, then we've got to figure out a way to try to get an average, but there's not like a middle term, so it's starting to get a little tricky, because if we try to add these two together, we have 12 and 3 is 15. Divided by 2 would be 7.5, but where do I put it? Do I put it here or here? It's getting a little bit trickier. So let me show you. I'm kind of thinking that the average is going to start getting a little bit more difficult to figure out. So let me show you something that I was thinking about as I worked on this. I started thinking, I know I have to have a common difference from here to here, and I have to have a common difference from the second term to the third term. I have to have a common difference from the third term to the fourth term. I have to have a common difference from the fourth term to the fifth term. I have to have a common difference from the fifth term to the sixth term, and I have to have a common difference from the sixth term to the seventh term. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 common differences. So I know that that common difference has to be the same number that I'm going to add. And then I started thinking, well, what's the spread? What's the range between the first term and the seventh term? So the difference between 12 and -6 is actually, if I started at 12 and I went down to -6, I would go 12 minus a -6, which is really equal to 18. So it's sort of a point spread, or a spread of 18 spots or points, because I would have to go from 12 to 0 is 12, and then from 0 to 6, or -6 is another 6. So 12 spots on the number line is how far I'm going to have to go from 12 to -6. Well, that means that I'm going to have to divide up those 18, that difference between the 12 and the -6. I'm going to have to divide that into 6 even amounts. So if I took 18 and I divided it by 6, that would give me 3. So maybe my difference is 3, but not adding it, subtracting it, because I'm going down. So maybe if I do -3 here, 12 minus 3 is 9. And then 9 minus 3 is 6. And then 6 minus 3 is 3. And then 3 minus 3 is 0. And then 0 minus 3 is -3. And -3 minus 3 gives me -6. So the key was to find the constant difference, right? Because once I know what the constant difference is, then I can figure out the terms, right? It's pretty easy. I can figure out the terms. So let's go ahead and try a few more. And now that we're going to know that we're going to try to find the constant difference, let's see if you can come up with some ways to figure out the constant difference. So let's do this next one. We've got 4 terms, 1, 2, 3, 4. First term is 50. Last term is 86, and then we've got 2 missing terms. See if you can figure out what the constant difference should be between these terms, and then be ready to explain how you figured that out. So how did you figure out the constant difference? Did you do it the way that I did it up here, where you kind of thought about, I'm going from 50 to 86, so that means I've got to put, I'm going to have three constant differences that I'm going to be adding, and then I have to figure out my point spread. So what I would do is I would take the 86 and I would subtract 50, and I'd say that that's 36, right? 86 minus 50 is 36, and then I would divide that by my 3 numbers. 36 divided by 3 is 12, so I'm going to add 12 to both. but maybe you came up with a different way. How did you figure out the constant difference? Write about that. Now, let's talk a little bit about some ways that we could actually think about this. I've shown you what I do, where I actually have to draw it out. I actually look at my table, I draw out my number of constant differences that will be added, and then I figure out what the difference is, the amount that has to be spread out. Another way to think about this is you could say that my last term is 86, right? My last term is 86, and to get to 86, I had to start with my first term, and then I had to add my constant difference 1, 2, 3 times. Do you see what I just did? I started with my end, my last term that I knew, the term that I knew, which was 86. And I said to get to 86, I had to start with my first term, which was 50, and then I had to add the constant difference 1, 2, 3 times. And then really all I was doing was solving for my constant difference. I subtracted 50, and I got 36 equals 3D. I divided by 3, and I got D equals 12. See how I did that? And then now all I have to do to fill in my missing terms is 50 plus 12 is, might help if I write the right number, 62. And 62 plus 12 is 74. And then just to double check, 74 plus 12 is equal to 86. So that's one way that I could do this problem. It's one way. Let's go ahead and try the next one. See if you come up with a different way to find the constant difference. See if you come up with another way to find the constant difference. So, what was the constant difference that you came up with this time? Let's see if we can figure it out. Let's first say that we're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 constant differences, right? To get from here to here, here to here, here to here. So there's going to be 5 constant differences. And we could do the same equation that we did before, where we said to get to 10, I'm going to start with 40, and I'm going to add 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 D's, 40 plus 5D. Let me write it over here. 40 plus 5D equals 10. And then we could just solve for our difference. But what if we used an explicit function instead? Do you remember the explicit function? It was f of n equals the first term, right? Or at like f of 1. The first term plus n minus 1 times d, or d times n minus 1. So could we use that function to figure this out? Well, if we wanted to say that we were trying to figure out what the 6th term was, we could say that f of n, which is going to be f of 6, which is equal to 10, is equal to our first term, 40, plus our n, which was 6, right? F of n is 6, so the n is 6, so n minus 1, 6 minus 1 would be 5. So let me write it like this, 6 minus 1 times d. So now we have 10 equals 40 plus 5d. So it's really the exact same thing, and we didn't even have to figure out how many constant differences there were if we just know that it was n minus 1. So either way, we figured out that there were 5 constant differences, and now we can just solve. And we've got negative 30 equals 5d, divide by 5, and d equals negative 6. So that means so now that I know what d is, which is negative 6, I can put it right here. So 40 minus 6 is 34. 34 minus 6 is 28. 28 minus 6 is 22. 22 minus 6 is 16. And 16 minus 6 is 10. So, really the key is finding the constant difference. Go ahead and do this last one. It's got a lot of missing terms. Start at 12, you end up with 5, and you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 missing terms. So use one of these two methods. Either draw out your missing terms, or draw out your constant differences, or use the explicit function to figure out using f of 8 as your key when you are you're solving for d. So go ahead and do that, and go ahead and tell me what your constant difference is, and then see if you can fill in the missing terms. So, what'd you come up with? You should have come up with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 constant differences that are going to be added, and you've got a difference of 12 to 5. So you went backwards from 12 to 5. So let's see if we did 5 minus 12 equals negative 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So it looks like we're going down by negative 1. We're just going down by 1. See what I just did? So 12 minus 1 is 11. 11 minus 1 is 10. 10 minus 1 is 9. 9 minus 1 is 8. 8 minus 1 is 7. 7 minus 1 is 6. And 6 minus 1 is 5. So it's kind of like solving a little puzzle. And again, there are different ways that you can find these missing terms, which, by the way, when we said arithmetic means, that's what we were talking about, those missing terms. Each of those missing terms is called an arithmetic mean, M-E-A-N, a mean. So we've got some ways that we can find arithmetic means. We've got guess and check. Not your best way. Kind of gets to be a little difficult. Finding the average, could work but might not work. Find and use the constant difference, that's really the best way. And as you can see, there are different ways to do it. You can actually draw out your lines so that you can count your arithmetic means, or you can look at the term and use your explicit function to figure it out. It's up to you how you want to do it, but really the best thing to do is to find your constant difference. So in whatever way it works for you to find the constant difference, then you should be able to fill in your missing terms or those arithmetic means. Hope that works for you, and I'll see you in class.